This is the Registered Behavior Technician course presented by Shaza Attar. The course content was created by Shaza Attar and is the property of Autism Therapy and Training, Inc. All rights are reserved. This training program is based on the Behavior Analyst Certification Board 2018 RBT Task List 2nd edition and is designed to meet the 40-hour training requirement for the RBT credential. The program is offered independent of the BACB. Remember, in each class, we will have our active listening, a quiz, and a competency assessment. Hello. Welcome to today's topic, which is implementing crisis and emergency procedures according to protocol. Let's begin with crisis prevention. Crisis prevention deals with prevention and safety, protection and de-escalation, as well as treatment. As an RBT and frontline staff, you'll be faced with a variety of problem behaviors. It's essential that you're trained accurately on the implementation of protocols and strategies. Severe problem behaviors put both the client and others in danger. It is our top priority to keep our clients safe as well as ourselves and others. It's essential that antecedent interventions are used to identify triggers to those problem behaviors. Handling problem behaviors can sometimes be overwhelming and cause some distress. Remember, don't take the problem behavior personal. It's not about you. Try to be understanding and empathetic. Stay calm and do not overreact. Don't judge. Use non-provoking verbal and nonverbal behaviors. The way you stand, position your hands or words that you use. Remember, in this class, we're talking about crisis prevention, but we're not doing crisis prevention intervention. This isn't a course that is teaching you exactly what to do. You actually have to take specific training for that, and you can get a certificate for that kind of training. I want to just outline the things that you need to know and how to deal with certain situations. But of course, getting that training through a training program or through your supervisor, if they are certified in CPI, would be crucial. CPI would teach you things on how to do specific holds and what to do. But I want to talk just in general about dealing with that crisis situation, but mainly the topic here is about actually implementing those protocols and making sure that we stick to them. And that's where the biggest issue often occurs. So let's talk about the actual behaviors and then really the precursor behaviors, because I want you guys to be able to identify those before we get into that big outburst behavior, because that's the thing that we're trying to avoid in most situations. Now, of course, if we have a protocol in place, then we're dealing with that behavior. But if you know what the learner's triggers are, which are the precursor behaviors that I'm going to talk about in just a moment, your life is going to go a lot smoother in your therapy sessions. So let's talk about that. Precursor behaviors are behaviors that precede that full-blown behavior, that outburst behavior that I was just talking about. Understanding the triggers is really important because it's really going to help you understand those precursor behaviors. So you want to be able to see those precursor behaviors, and then before you get that outburst, you're doing something at that point. Some examples of these may be, the child throws a toy, or maybe the adult slams the door, or they stomp out of the room. Knowing what your learner likes and what their triggers are is crucial. It may be a loud noise or a strong sense or a messy classroom, or touching them on their shoulder, saying a specific word, removal of a reinforcer or denial of a reinforcer, hunger, thirst, maybe the room is too warm, maybe they haven't been to the washroom, maybe their sleeve got wet. Those are all possible triggers that could result in that big outburst behavior. So if you know that your learner does not like having a wet sleeve, then that's something that you want to be aware of. If you know that your learner, doesn't like a certain something, then you're attentive to that. So if that situation occurs, you're aware that either that big outburst is going to happen or you're de-escalating that situation. So if you know that your learner comes in tired, for example, and typically will engage in problem behaviors because of this, well, what could you do? You may start the day slow and allow your learner to warm up to that day. Start with easy and fun tasks. This could be, for example, man training or playing with preferred activities. You want to avoid jumping into hard tasks immediately and starting your session like that, because then, of course, you might get that big outburst behavior, which, again, that's not something that we want. So ask yourself, when was the last time they ate? When did they last drink? Is the learner looking sick? Have they been to the washroom? Have they slept or ate well? Be sure to check your session notes. Our goal is to prevent a crisis. We don't want to provoke behaviors. We want to protect the learner from harm and injury at all times. And we want to de-escalate the behaviors as quickly as possible. I'm going to give you an example here. I want you to assume that you have a learner that will engage in problem behavior when a reinforcer is removed. So suppose that the learner is watching their favorite video and now you need to interrupt them because you need to transition them into something else, maybe the work that they have to do, maybe going back to the table. If you immediately just stop that video, chances are you're going to trigger that problem behavior because the removal of that is what was the trigger. So you need to speak to your supervisor about identifying those triggers, and then we need to look at possible solutions for that. But if you don't have a solution, then you need to try to avoid creating those situations, and it's better to use antecedent manipulation strategies. So maybe rather than just turning off the video right away, I can maybe find another activity, place it on the table, make it look fun, and then I can transition them more successfully to the table. Let's continue. Aggressive, self-injurious behaviors and property destruction are crisis behaviors that we want to, let's say, decrease and prevent. Now, of course, you can have many other behaviors, but these are some of them. If there is no behavior protocol, don't run a protocol to decrease some behavior. Ensure you are running programs accurately so that you're not triggering these behaviors. And pay close attention to your learner's body language and facial cues. If a behavior occurs, protect the learner, yourself, and others at all costs. When precursor behaviors occur, an RBT should be near the learner, 1 to 2 arm lengths away. And we talk about this a lot when we're working with our learners at the center. You need to be an arm's length away from them. You don't want them to be across the room or wandering off, and by the time you get to them, they've already engaged in a problem behavior. Maybe they've hurt another peer, maybe they've thrown something dangerous. So always be close to your learner. Depending on the learner and the severity of their behavior, you don't want to place further demands on the learner. Give them time to settle down, then redirect them. Now again, if there is no protocol in place, then you need to look at that situation and analyze it. If I continue to present them with the task or follow through with it, I could try, and if that learner is really giving me a difficult time or the behavior is escalating and it's getting out of control, is it the right thing to do to continue in that moment, or do I stop and maybe call for help or call for my supervisor? And now this is really important for you and your supervisor to determine what to do in those situations. Because yes, if you stop in this moment, you're reinforcing the problem behavior. But if you continue to present them with the tasks or whatever it may be, then we might actually be looking at greater risk. And so at this point, you have to analyze the risk that's involved. The child may end up getting hurt. If you tried to keep them at the table or restrain them in some way, you might actually cause injury to the learner. There might be then bruising. Now we're dealing with a bigger issue. So think about the situation. The goal is to try to follow through, but the real goal is to know what the protocol is. And if there isn't a protocol, then you've got to be speaking to your supervisor immediately. Be prepared and ready to de-escalate. Keep your hands in a neutral position. You could keep your hands low near your waistline for young children. You can also keep your hands up higher near your chest for taller individuals, keeping your fingers together. You want to keep your environment safe. Individuals that engage in severe behaviors may use objects or items in the room as weapons. Remove these objects from the room. No hot drinks in the room. Sharp objects or scissors and even pencils could be used as weapons, so you want to get those out of the room if you think that they could be dangerous, or place them up high. Keep your clients safe. Protect their head by placing your hands in a way to block self-injury or banging against hard surfaces. Don't remove the client from the room. This can injure you or the client. Keep others safe by removing them out of the room. And keep yourself safe. Always stand behind or beside the client when handling a problem behavior and never in front of them. You'll need a strong communication system, code phrases or words to alert other staff so that they can come and help. All right, before we continue, let's do a Marvel character. Today's character is Mantis, a new member of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and she's got empathetic abilities. Remember to be empathetic like Mantis, especially when you're dealing with problem behaviors. All right, let's move on. I want you to imagine this. Mike is a 14-year-old boy who engages in severe aggression, pulling on anything he can see, ripping things, throwing objects, and even running out of the room. Sarah is a therapist working with Mike in his treatment center. She's going out with the girls later tonight, so she decided to wear heels, her beautiful long earrings, and straightened her hair, and left it untied when she came into work today. She's so excited, and she figured that this wouldn't be a problem since she's only working with Mike for an hour. Mike came into the treatment center with what everyone described as a bad mood. Sarah only has the hour, so she places all his program targets on him to get through it quickly. Mike then begins throwing the teaching material, but Sarah keeps on going. Then he starts pulling on her hair and trying to pull her across the room. He finally releases her hair and runs towards the door, but Sarah struggles to run with her heels on. She gets close enough to grab onto him, but ends up scratching him instead, and he begins to bleed. So, what's wrong here? It's important to think of your dress code. You want to avoid long earrings, avoid items in your hair such as hair clips, avoid necklaces, or anything that's around your neck that could be a choking hazard. Wearing long sleeves when working with children that may pinch or scratch to protect your own skin. Wearing running shoes and comfortable clothing. Avoiding flip-flops or slippers that will slow you down. Avoid tight clothing and avoid high heels. Keep your hair tied up and away from the client's reach. Be sure to keep your nails clipped to avoid scratching the learner. All right, let's go back to Mike and Sarah. I want you to imagine the next day Sarah comes into the center wearing running shoes, no jewelry, and her hair is tied back. As she's working with Mike, she pulls out all his favorite activities and games. She plays with one, then places it on the floor, then plays with another and places it on the floor. Then all around her work area are boxes of activities and games. As they were playing, she told Mike to tidy up because she had to leave for the day. Mike didn't want to clean up, so he pushed her and threw toys at her. As she was trying to get up to stop him, she tripped over the activities and fell flat on her face. So what do you think is wrong here? You want to be sure to avoid clutter around your table or classroom. Keep your area tidy so if a behavior occurs, you can run and move around without tripping or hurting yourself. Always be ready with your learner that are a flight risk or tend to run. The other thing that you want to be aware of is, or to think about is to be ready and to anticipate the possibility of that problem behavior occurring. If you know that your learner tends to throw toys and you say clean up, you might want to predict that if you said clean up, your learner might engage in that problem behavior. So I think having that ready state that your learner may engage in problem behavior so that you're ready, so it's not really a shock or a surprise to you. Let's take a look at Mike and Sarah again. This time, the treatment team decided to use locks on all main doors so that Mike does not escape the classroom. They placed them high enough so that he could not reach them, but the teachers could. One day, one of the staff brings in her learner but forgets to lock the main door. Sarah notices the unlocked door from a distance but doesn't lock it since Mike will be leaving in 15 minutes anyways. As Mike is walking to the washroom, he suddenly bolts to the front door, opens it, and runs out. Sarah is caught off guard. She gets up and runs as fast as she can, but she can't catch up. So you want to be sure that you don't block all entrances or exits to the room by using tables to block them. And this is in case of an emergency. This can slow people down. You want to keep all doors locked if you do have a system in place such as that, using safety locks or handles to decrease the chances of children escaping the classroom. Some clients may need to have 2 staff at all times with them, so make sure you follow your school or center's protocol. I want to give you an example here. I had a little guy named AA, and I originally started working with him at the daycare, supporting the team there, and that's where we did his therapy for the bulk of the time. And this was a center that had the main daycare, at the corner, but then they had some additional, almost like classrooms, that were their separate units. And they had a door in the front and a door in the back. And the protocol for the center there was that they had to lock the doors whenever anybody came in. So if a parent came in to drop off their child, they would drop them off, and then somebody was responsible for locking the door. Now, the only problem with that is sometimes some of the children would actually unlock the door to allow the other kids and parents to come in. So that was a bit of an issue there. The other issue was sometimes a staff member didn't lock the door. So if a child allowed a parent and child to come in, then the staff didn't notice. And they didn't really have a system to follow up with that locking of the door. Anyways, we knew that our little guy, AA, was a flight risk, and he, if there was a door that was available and it was open, he would run out whenever he could. So we made sure, and I made sure I communicated to everybody that please allow just the teachers to open the doors and lock them, and to be sure that they get locked. And let's do a little bit of a double check. Now, I wasn't a staff member of the daycare, so I was just an outsider coming in, working with him for a couple of hours, and then leaving. So one day I'm sitting there doing my thing with him. We had the back end of the center while all the other kids were playing, in their activity areas and whatnot. And we did our therapy in the back, but then I allowed him access to the other kids and the activities, so we would kind of go back and forth. So one day, I'm sitting there, I'm working with him, and everything is going just great. Suddenly, whatever the demand was, he was not ready to do that skill, and I was attempting to follow through. He decided to leave the table and bolt to the front of the room. Now, because I know the door is locked, I wasn't panicking. I was trying to move as quickly as I could. I didn't want to chase after him either, because I didn't want him to think it was funny and it was a game that we were playing. He goes to the front door and he pushes on that front door. And guess what? That door was not locked. And he got out of the unit and into the parking lot. The daycare teacher and the assistant teacher and I all ran. We were in a panic because now he was in the parking lot. And I think the scariest part of that, and the thing that really stuck with me, is following protocol is so crucial, and taking action. So if you know that there's a protocol to lock the doors, to ensure that those doors are being locked, and for staff to be responsible to look at those doors and ensure that they're locked, or do little tests throughout the day. But it's also important for the therapist to predict that behavior and know that this learner may run, but then maybe to even have a communication system to say, hey, somebody stand by that front door, because what if it's not locked? And I think that really stuck with me. And, as I opened up my own center, we have doors that are to be locked. And it's something that always, I always talk to my staff about, and I always share the story with them, because I don't want that to happen to them. And, depending on if you're working at home with a client or in a school setting, if that child gets out, it's a huge issue. It's a huge problem. If you're dealing with adults, it might be the same thing. So we do want to be very careful And we want to ensure that we're implementing the protocols. And if you see an error, like Sarah did, she noticed that that door was not locked, I would immediately lock it, communicate to someone to have it locked, so that that does not happen. So really keep that in mind when you're thinking about these in your own practice. Let's continue. If behaviors get out of control and staff are unable to support their client, you may need to call 911 in an emergency situation. Again, remember to follow your school or center's protocol. Be aware of your organization's preventative strategies. If you don't know them, find out what they are. Don't wait for the emergency situation to occur. You want to be prepared. Now, let's imagine Sarah took a week-long vacation and returned to the center as usual. She sat with Mike and worked with him. Mike began biting himself and Sarah attempted to block him. But when she did, Mike bit her. A staff member quickly said, "Hey Sarah, did you read the updated protocol?" And Sarah shakes her head. She says, "Nope, I didn't review that protocol yet." So don't be like Sarah. And be sure you have reviewed all your behavior protocols. If you've been away, revisit them or get updated on them. Your supervisor is responsible for ensuring proper implementation. Weekly supervision or potentially more supervisions may be required depending on the client and your training. Here's one more scenario. Imagine Sarah presents Mike with a math test. He begins pushing it away and reaches over and pulls her hair. She attempts to remove his fingers by unrolling them, but as she's doing that, she heard a crack and he began screaming. Unfortunately, she accidentally broke his fingers. So what went wrong here? Let's get into crisis prevention intervention. But before we do, let's do another Scrabble word. The word is mezzo, spelled M-E-Z-Z-O. And this is a female singer. Okay, let's continue and talk about crisis prevention intervention. Now remember, I'm not doing CPI training here for you, but what I am going to talk about is just how to handle behaviors in a general idea. You're not getting a certificate here on CPI, so just keep that in mind. But I do recommend that if you do work with challenging individuals with severe behaviors, one, obviously, your organization should recommend it, provide it, send you off to do it, or you should do it. So that you know how to deal with the behaviors. So we're just going to do an overview of what crisis prevention is and just talk about generally about it. So I don't want you to get too excited about that. So crisis prevention intervention, CPI, is a specific training in handling behaviors. It provides ways of managing crisis behaviors. It also provides correct ways to manage the client to ensure safety. You'll have to see a CPI training online or in your local area. So there are things out there that you can do. So that is something that you can do for yourself or as required by your agency. Just like CPR and first aid, CPI requires a certified trainer to provide training. If you work with children, teens, and adults, it's highly recommended. It's important to know how to help a client in a crisis situation so that you don't cause more injury. Now remember, during a behavior, never grab the client by their arm or pull them up to stand them up. Many people do this with children. However, it's not safe and can injure the child. Support the learner by placing your hands under their armpits. Don't pull the client by the wrist or the arm. Avoid power struggles such as pulling them away or chasing the client. I'm going to give you an example here. Sometimes when your learner is sitting with you at the table and they suddenly get up because they're about to escape, a lot of people will have that initial reaction to physically stop them so that they don't run away. Now, what happens when you physically stop them is you might actually lose your own balance and end up toppling over on top of the child, and they'll fall over, causing injury to both the child and to yourself. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to do any type of restraint or hold unless you are certified to do so and the person who is creating that protocol allows you to do so. So that's crucial. All right, let's continue. You want to use minimal physical touch. So instead, try guiding the learner. Be mindful of the learner's reaction during the behavior. For example, if they start laughing and seeking your attention, then you want to be careful and stop there. Another example could be during a compliance procedure and a follow-through type procedure. You might want to avoid touching the client, but rather just guiding them to engage in the correct behavior, because touching them they may enjoy it, or they might lash out at you even more because they don't like the touch. So you have to be aware of that. Often after handling a behavior, you may feel exhausted or emotionally aroused. Be sure to speak to your supervisor to express any concerns. You may also take time away to regroup for about 5 to 10 minutes and just allow yourself to de-escalate your own self and to decompress. Now let's talk about first aid and CPR. They're also offered by certified trainers. It gives you the knowledge you need to handle injuries or other serious situations. All staff should be certified in first aid and CPR. Practice protocol with your team in case of an emergency and injury, and be ready to handle those situations. Most importantly, stay calm. Keep other children away from the injury site. Keep your learner calm and safe, and administer first aid practices or call 911 and notify your supervisor. And remember, you'll have to notify the client as well. All right, let's get into the quiz. Good luck. What is the best way to dress when working with behavioral clients? A, flip-flops, B, running shoes, C, barefoot, or D, slippers? And the correct response is B, running shoes. What is the best way to dress when working with a client that typically scratches? A, shorts, B, scarf, C, long sleeves, or D, short sleeves? And the correct response is C, long sleeves. What are some preventative measures you can take to ensure a safe environment? A, remove clutter from the floor. B, avoid blocking exits and entrances. C, remove sharp objects. D, all of the above. And the correct response is D, all of the above. What are some preventative measures you can take to ensure your safety? A, don't corner yourself in a room. B, stand beside or behind the learner when a behavior occurs. C, call for support from other staff members. Or D, all of the above. And the correct response is D, all of the above. The RBT was asked to use extinction on Billy's escape-maintain behavior. What would the procedure look like? A, let him get away from the task. B, follow him around the room. C, do not remove the task. Or D, none of these. And the correct response is C, do not remove the task. The RBT was asked to use sensory extinction for Sarah's scratching behavior. What would the procedure look like? A, tie her hands down. B, put long sleeves on her. C, put gloves on. D, none of the above. And the correct response is B and C, put long sleeves on her and put gloves on her. The RBT was working with Tommy, who started shaking his head when he was given a task. He then started banging the table. The RBT recognized that these are behaviors that will lead into a full-blown tantrum. What are these behaviors called? A, problem behavior. B, antecedent behaviors. C, precursor behaviors. Or D, pre-behaviors. And the correct response is C, precursor behaviors. Your learner is showing signs of distress, which usually leads to a full-blown aggressive behavior. You should be about A, 3 to 4 feet away, B, 1 to 2 arms lengths away, C, in front of the learner, D, stay back and let it all settle down. And the correct response is B, 1 to 2 arms lengths away. Great work. Our number one goal is to A, provoke behavior, B, prevent a crisis situation, C, escalate a situation, or D, none of these. And the correct response is B, prevent a crisis situation. Linda is a daycare teacher. She has a boy with severe aggression. When a behavior begins, he will stomp his feet, then kick a chair, and will search for a sharp object and attempt to hit someone with it. What should Linda do to ensure everyone's safety? A, put scissors in locked cabinets. B, de-escalate him once she sees him stomping around. C, keep pencils and pens at her desk only. Or D, all of these. And the correct response is D, all of these. Linda is a daycare teacher. She has a boy with severe aggression. All the teachers bring their hot coffees into the classroom and place them high on the shelf. What should Linda do to ensure everyone's safety? A, bring the coffees to a lower shelf to prevent a spill. B, do nothing. The coffees are high on a shelf. C, tell the teachers to keep their coffees in the staff room only. Or D, all of these. And the correct response is C, tell the teachers to keep their coffees in the staff room only. The RBT denies John access to his preferred reinforcer because he made a mistake on his math worksheet. John has tendencies of throwing tables and chairs when denied access to a reinforcer. There is no protocol in place. John begins screaming and throwing chairs. What should the RBT do? A, call for help. B, have other teachers remove the other students from the classroom. C, stay back and give him time to de-escalate. Or D, all of these. And the correct response is D, all of these. It's important that when an individual engages in problem behavior and there's no protocol in place, that you do call for help so that you are supported during that time. But it's also important if the learner is engaging in a behavior, and you'll notice in a lot of schools they have a procedure where if one learner engages in problem behavior, the others are removed. So if that is the protocol in your school environment or in your organization, then be sure that you know of it and you follow through with that. It's also important that when a learner is in a heightened state and they're engaging in problem behavior, that you're not in their face and triggering more problem behaviors, that you can stay back and give them time to de-escalate. And when I say stay back, I don't mean you're 5 meters away from them. You might just be a foot or two away from them, just allowing them to de-escalate and to calm themselves back down. Sometimes when somebody's in that heightened state and you continue to soothe them or you're trying to give them things, it just keeps the problem behavior going. So just allow them to calm down and then you can re-engage them. The RBT denies John access to his preferred reinforcer because he made a mistake on a math worksheet. John has tendencies of throwing tables and chairs when denied access to a reinforcer. There's no protocol in place. John begins screaming and throwing chairs. What could the RBT have done differently? A, spoke to her supervisor about the math errors. B, not denied access to the reinforcer. C, attempted to prevent his behavior. or D, all of these? So the correct response is D, all of these. So yes, the RBT should speak to the RBT should speak to her supervisor immediately. The RBT should also have not denied access to the reinforcer. And another thing to add to this, I would say, is I would really look at what the RBT did, and really look at antecedent manipulation strategies, and denying the learner their access to the reinforcer may not be an approach that we can use with John because of his his aggressive behavior. So if you have a learner that engages in that kind of behavior and you think that, I'm going to differentially reinforce or I'm going to do something else, that may not be the right thing to do, and you really have to speak to your supervisor. I think if you and your supervisor have great communication, and you identify that as a trigger and as a problem, and let's say your supervisor has said, I need you to use differential reinforcement. So if he does great, you give him a big reinforcer and the reinforcer. And if he doesn't, then differentially reinforce and give him something that he doesn't want, or, you should never really deny access to a reinforcer. But let's say you gave them something different, then you might want to speak to your supervisor about that, because that may not be the best approach, because now his safety is at risk and your safety is at risk. Omar is a flight risk and will bolt out of the classroom. What can the teacher do to prevent him from escaping her classroom? A, just keep an eye on him. B, notify the principal. C, close the door. Or D, none of these. And the correct response is C, close the door. Layla runs into the classroom. One day Layla was running and she tripped and fell. She had a big cut on her forehead and is bleeding severely. What should the teacher do? A, administer CPR. B, administer first aid. C, nothing, Layla needs to learn the hard way. Or D, none of these. And the correct response is B, administer first aid. Layla runs into the classroom. One day Layla was running, she tripped and fell and had a big cut on her forehead and is bleeding severely. What should the teacher do? A, have someone call 911. B, administer first aid. C, notify the principal. Or D, all of these. And the correct response is D. You may actually have to call 911 if the cut was pretty big and the individual was bleeding severely. Of course, you want to administer first aid, so you want to be trained in first aid so that you can do that. And you also want to notify your supervisor or the principal or whoever is in charge there, so they can also be aware and be there to support. Layla runs into the classroom. One day Layla was running and she tripped and fell. She had a big cut on her forehead and is bleeding severely. What should the teacher do to prevent this situation in the future? A, ensure a protocol is in place to address this behavior. B, hope it never happens again. C, block Layla in a corner so she can't move. Or D, all of these. And the correct response is A, ensure protocols in place to address this behavior. Layla runs into the classroom. One day Layla was running and she tripped and fell. She got a big cut on her forehead and is bleeding severely. What should the teacher do to prevent this situation in the future? A, keep reminding Layla to walk in the classroom. B, notify her supervisor immediately. C, block Layla in the corner so she can't move. Or D, all of these. And the correct response is B, notify her supervisor immediately. Remember, if you were just to remind her, to remind Layla to walk in the classroom, that may not improve her behavior. So something may need to be put into place so that she learns to walk instead of running in the classroom. So that's something you'll need to speak to your supervisor about and let them know so that you guys can come up with a plan for this individual. Layla runs in the classroom. One day she was running and she tripped and fell. She got a big cut on her forehead and is now bleeding severely. What should the teacher do to prevent this situation in the future? A, ensure staff is always walking no more than a foot away so that they can immediately stop the behavior. B, notify her supervisor immediately. C, before Layla leaves her seat to remind her to walk. And D, all of these. And the correct response is all of these. So you can for sure walk right beside the learner so that you are anticipating that behavior because you know that she's the type who will run in the classroom. Notifying your supervisor again so you can get a protocol in place. And, you can also give her the reminder when she first stands up to walk in the classroom. Now, again, this is prompted, so we want to be able to fade that at some point, but at least you're preventing it so that it doesn't happen, and then you can actually teach her the right skill. You take your learner to the gym room, which is in the basement of the building. One day, your learner engaged in severe self-injury, hitting his head against the concrete floor. You called for help, but no one could hear you. How could you have prevented the situation? A, notify your supervisor and request that you bring your cell phone with you. B, request walkie-talkies. C, always go with another staff member. Or D, all of these. And the correct response is D, all of these. So if you can recall back to one of my stories with one of the 15-year-old boys that I was working with in the basement of the building, this had happened to me. So again, it's really important that you do communicate with your supervisor, get the equipment that you need so that you're supported, that people can hear you, because you don't want to be left alone calling for help and no one is there to help you. Your learner has a tendency to pull their peers' hair when they walk by them. After lunch one day, all the kids were sitting on the carpet reading, and your learner walked over to another peer and pulled their hair. The family was angry that this happened to their daughter because she lost a chunk of her hair. How could you have prevented this situation? A, keep your learner in an isolated room. B, it was an honest mistake. C, be about an arm's length from your learner at all times. Or D, all of these. And the correct response is C, be about an arm's length from your learner at all times. My final thoughts. Always speak to your supervisor and know what protocols are in place. Do not run things that are not a protocol or that you are unsure of. Always think safety and be prepared. Be sure to get training in CPI, first aid, and CPR to ensure that you're ready to support your learner. Be sure to support the client in a way which promotes positive interactions. Be sure to support the development of the client by following all procedures as specified in the client's behavior intervention plan. Be sure to prevent and protect self and others from injury. And be sure to reduce unnecessary damage to property. You also want to be sure to implement any necessary reactive strategies using least restrictive approaches. And be sure to understand triggers that set off your learner. Identify them with your supervisor and add them to your behavior plan. This is to help minimize future problem behaviors. You want to keep your hair tied back. Nails are clipped. No jewelry, and make sure that you have proper shoes on your feet. You want to keep your environment safe. No scissors laying around or other dangerous objects. You want to remove clutter from the floor, which may cause injury. And remember to always speak to your supervisor about problem behaviors. Everyone is good at making accommodations to avoid those problem behaviors, but this is not the best practice. It's important that we address the triggers to provide a better quality of life for the learner and their family. When prompting the learner, place your hands under their armpits safely and gently. Use the most amount of prompts to support your learner, and never pull your learner by their hands. If they have flopped to the floor and you attempted to pull them up by their hands, this could dislocate their hand or even their shoulder. And it's always best to use your hands and place them under your learner's back or armpits, providing with the most amount of support. Learners that are heavier and you're unable to lift them, don't lift them. Have another therapist help you if you had to. Each therapist may place a hand behind the back or under their armpit and gently lift them to where you need to go, especially if it's a dangerous situation. We want to avoid lifting the client, but if we had to, then that's one of the ways that you could do it. Lifting the learner may only occur if the learner is in a dangerous position, as I was saying. For example, if they're sitting on the top of the stairs, the risk of your learner, falling down the stairs when they're having that problem behavior is greater. And so by lifting them, you might actually be putting them in a safer situation. Blocking any hits using your hands is permitted. So never hold down and restrain your learner unless it's a specific protocol that is being used and you have consent for all of that. But you want to remember touching a learner may result in bruising. So it's crucial to pay attention to the amount of pressure you're using. Using a gentle touch may be allowed at your organization, but restraining the learner and making them stay in their seat could result in added pressure, which will result in bruising. And I'll give you an example. There was a learner that was required to sit at the table during his therapy time. And what he would typically do is get up and walk away. And the senior therapist instructed her team to use a compliance procedure. And now with a compliance procedure, you know that sometimes when you first initially implement it, the behavior may last 20, 30, 40 minutes. The most important part about using any type of procedure, unless otherwise specified, is that you're not using pressure. That's not the point of the procedure. It's not about using physical force to get them to do something. It's to get them to respond to whatever it is that you're saying. So if you're saying sit down, the learner will sit down. And so what ended up happening here was the RBT was following through and physically trying to keep him sitting, which was the big problem because he ended up bruising on his back. Now, if there was no hold or pressure being put on and the protocol was implemented correctly, then this wouldn't have happened. Now, the other issue was the senior therapist was there supporting the staff and didn't coach her correctly. So sometimes as an RBT, you'll be sitting there and depending on who your supervisor is and how the setup is, you may not get the right coaching or support, or maybe the supervisor doesn't know how to handle it because it's outside of their competency. So it's important for you to really question, even in that moment, am I doing the right thing, and could I be causing any injury to the individual? If you're holding them and touching them and physically forcing them, then I would say to you, you need to stop that, and it's not the right thing to do. Now, if there was a specific CPI hold that you were using, then that's a different story, because the type of holds that are known and practiced in CPI would not result in that kind of bruising, and you've gotten consent, and there's a whole process to that. So it's really important for you to also use your own judgment in that moment. So if you feel that you're causing bruising, or you could cause bruising, or whatever it may be in that situation, then you may need to tell your supervisor, I'm not going to put my hands on him. I'd rather him actually flop to the floor and escape, and you continued with the compliance procedure, but using a hands-off approach so that he doesn't get bruised and injured. And then sometimes you just need to really look at that protocol and procedure and reevaluate it with your supervisor to see if it's the most effective strategy for that individual. So Implementing these emergency protocols and these these types of protocols in your daily practice is important, but it's also important that you and your supervisor have that communication in regards to what you think is working or not. And if it's not working, it may not actually be the protocol, it may be the consistency of how everybody is running it. So making sure the whole team is doing it the right way. All right, let's continue. So it's crucial for the therapist and supervisor to use their judgment, as I was just saying. If you're unable to follow through with the task successfully with minimal risk and injury, then following through is allowed. If you begin to struggle with the learner, or you feel you're restraining them, or you're putting too much pressure, then remove your hands immediately. Keep the learner safe. Remove any other learners from the environment if you had to. Always speak to your supervisor about these kinds of situations. Supervising therapists must always notify their BCBA, discussing the trigger, outcome, and next steps. All must be documented. It's so important that when you have a situation like that, or the individual engages in a behavior, or emergency protocol has been used, it's really important to document it so that you guys can go back and also reflect on that, see what went wrong and how you can improve on that. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you at our next class.